Team building has grown significantly more awkward with all these new resonator pairs coming out, which is seemingly contradictory considering paired characters should make team building more straightforward. Let's talk about the third wheel problem, that is the loss of the general support. What exactly do I mean by general support? And why do we care? General supports provide team flexibility, keeping the game fresh and exciting. Without general supports, we as a player base lose that flexibility, and thus any excitement the provided versatility and experimentation brought. As for what general supports actually are, in 1.x I classified characters into 3 classes based on their outro ability in the context of a 3 resonator team, those being DPS, sub-DPS, and support. These were classified based on their outro skill, if it was a selfish or damage dealing outro, if it provided a targeted buff to the next resonator, or if it provided a general team-wide buff, respectively. However, 2.x characters have confused this classification. For one, we now have characters like Augusta, who have both a selfish aspect, defeat her majesty, literally, and a targeted buff for the next character, a 15% all attribute bonus, all while dealing enough damage to be considered the team's main DPS. Another complication is kits that provide team-wide buffs in their liberations, such as Lupa, a sub-DPS by my previous classification, who provides pack hunt to the team as well as a survivability in knockback recovery effect, similar to Shorekeeper. This definitely confuses my classification, forcing me to make these alterations. DPS, hybrid DPS, sub-DPS, hybrid support, and general support. If a DPS has a mixed selfish and targeted buff outro, I will classify them as a hybrid DPS, while if a sub-DPS has a liberation or kit that buffs the whole team, they are classified as a hybrid support. However, I do still prefer to assign classes based on outro skill as they fit the 3 resonator team mold best. Even with these new classifications, general supports are still important and, in my opinion, should be included in most every team. Why? There are a plethora of game mechanics that can be buffed to open up new playstyles for new teams. For instance, perhaps you want to focus on a different sub-aspect of your favorite character's kit. Then, if there was a general support that buffed that mechanic for the team, then you could play your favorite character in a new way. General supports allow for that freedom, to mix and match teams to potentially open up new ways to play old characters. Or, it allows flexibility to mix and match characters you enjoy playing, allowing you more freedom in who you pull. This ability is one specific reason I used to pull general supports in previous games, as it keeps the game fresh and manageable, even with an old or slightly mismatched cast of characters. However, characters since about 2.3 have been increasingly tied to other characters, or as part of a very specific mono attribute team. While it can be nice to have these straightforward to build teams, it quickly becomes boring as you go through the same exact rotation for the 10,000th time. Zani, my favorite character in Wuthering Waves, isn't exciting to play anymore, because it's the same rotation, every time. It burns players out if there is no variety of play, and with Depths of Elusive Realm gone, there really is no variety in play. This new direction could be explained as simple planned obsolescence. However, planned obsolescence is both the mark of a poor product and indicative of the designer's lack of confidence that their future character designs will innovate enough to still be appealing. I would like to believe, though, that is not the case for Kuro Games, who are some of the best artists and creators I've seen, with recent characters still having amazing characterization. It's just sad that these new character kits have terrible kit restrictions. So Corekeeper, how do these new resonator pairs you mentioned come into play? There was one major issue with making tailored DPS sub-DPS resonator pairs, such as Frolova Cantarella, Cartethia Shiakona, Sani Phoebe, Brant Lupa, and the new one, Augusta Yuno, as we can see Yuno's kit in Gallery Crossing Stars. That issue being, teams consist of 3 characters, not 2, not a pair. Making perfect pairs without also releasing general support characters basically sets the 3rd character up to be a 3rd wheel, such as Roshia in Frolova Cantarella teams, or Changli in Brant Lupa teams. I use these specific examples because both Cantarella and Brant heal, making you think you can forego the survivability offerings of general supports such as Shorekeeper and Verena in place of a 3rd sub-DPS. Additionally, these are the least extreme of the partner or pre-built teams, because they actually function with concerto outros properly feeding the next character that can make use of it. For instance, Roshia feeds Cantarella, who feeds Frolova, who then feeds back to Roshia, and the cycle repeats. However, it can feel awkward because there is obviously one character doing most of the damage, that being Brant or Frolova. So why are we wasting a resonator slot to buff specifically a sub-DPS or hybrid support? Thus, without a general support to support the primary DPS healer, or equally support both dual DPSs in a quick swap team, teams begin to feel awkward or rigid. An argument I often hear in support of this new rigid, pre-built teams is that Kuro Games messed up with Shorekeeper. She is too general and too good, making her an easy third slot on any team. This could be an example of designers messing up with their character design, making an overtuned character, and thus they are worried about making another. This argument is used to motivate or explain the reasoning behind the recent releases of more restrictive hybrid supports or hybrid DPSs. However, this is not the case. She is not an easy third slot on any team. She is the only third slot on any team. Another argument against additional general supports is that they would power creep current general supports. However, again, there is no need to design a Shorekeeper but better support, and there is no reason to worry about power creep as there is a substantial design space of game mechanics to explore. Currently, the only two general supports we have right now, and to some degree the hybrid support Lupa and Yuno soon to follow, explore only a small portion of Wuthering Waves' game mechanics. Namely, 1. Healing in Verena, general percent damage amp in SK and Verena, crit rate and crit damage in SK, knockdown recovery in Lupa and SK, specific attribute or damage type bonuses in Lupa and Yuno, attack percent increases in Lupa, and increased damage to specific enemy classes, also in Lupa. However, there are a plethora of other mechanics in the game besides those just mentioned. What other mechanics in Wuthering Waves can we design new general supports around? Let me list a few of them off for you real quick. First, we have cooldowns. Then we may have scaling stats, plus base or plus percent bonuses. We could have resistances, be that enemy or ally. Damage types, energy regen, successful dodges, dodge counters, counter attacks, vibration strength and immobilization, attack animation speed, ability levels, buff durations, shields, casting abilities, plunging attacks, knockback, traction, stagnation, coordinated attacks, interruption resistance, negative statuses, stamina, echo usage, overclocking, mobility, combo, protection zones, tools, concerto, or forte circuits. Specifically, recharging or scaling. This is just to name a few general mechanics that I could find or think of. I found a few of these mechanics in the Resonator stat list, a few of them in the Combat World glossary, and a final few in the tutorial section. I had to brainstorm a few as well, for instance, mobility as a whole. Are there any game mechanics that I missed? Let me know in the comments below so we can expand this list to highlight mechanics we'd like used to design new general supports that can enable different playstyles and dilute our reliance on Shorekeeper and Verena. All of these mechanics, including those in Verena and Shorekeeper's kits, can be used in outro skills as either payoffs or triggers for said payoffs. Let's take energy regen as an example mechanic. We could add a general support that upon outro gives a buff to the whole team that gives them some ramping payoff based on the amount of energy they regenerate for 30 seconds. An example payoff could be reduced cooldowns on Liberation, Echo, or some other abilities by 1 second for each 10 energy generated. Payoffs do not need to directly be crit rate or damage or scaling stats like attack or HP. Payoffs can also be anything that allows a character to apply their damage or deal their damage faster, or in more concentrated bursts. Alternatively, energy regen could be the payoff in of itself, with an outro buff that provides a massive energy regen bonus to the whole team, be it outright or upon some conditional trigger that any character could trigger, like a successful dodge or in the presence of a shield, but heaven forbid, not something unobtainable like after 10 shields are obtained. This could support characters that care about their own or teammates casting Liberation, but is also generally applicable to enable focusing any character on a Liberation playstyle. These mechanics can also be extended into supports Liberations as well as skills, since packing it all into your outro skill could be tough and may make the rest of the kit feel lopsided or uninspired. Now that I've given an example of how to use a mechanic both as a payoff and as a trigger, let's just briefly run through a few of the more vague mechanics to specify exactly what I mean by them. Now let's start these with negative statuses, as this I believe is important to touch on. As we have seen from Verena with her 15% all type damage deepen, and from Shorekeeper with her all nearby party members damage is amplified by 15%, general supports need to support general mechanics. That means, as a general support can't support just one damage or attribute type, such as Lupa and Yuno, as it restricts any other mechanics they buff to just characters that deal those damage classes, making them unusable with other characters. This is likely one reason general supports have been so hard to make, because what feels like a massive chunk of game mechanics, all the different damage and attributes, must be lumped into just two simple buffs. However, based on all of the mechanics listed above, and more I'm sure I missed, I don't believe it is necessary to provide team-wide specific damage or attribute type buffs. This is the same for negative statuses. As an overarching mechanic, negative statuses need to be buffed as a general mechanic, just like Verena and Shorekeeper do for all type damage. I envision this as 1. Increasing negative status damage dealt, or 2. Negative status stacks tick twice for each trigger. Negative statuses are a video of themselves though, as Glacio and electro-negative statuses do not fit with the other 4, but more on that later. Stamina. This can be made as both a payoff or a trigger. For instance, a stamina general support could increase stamina regen, allowing for stamina-intensive combat moves, potentially increasing overall DPS that wasn't previously attainable. Or, alternatively, reward the player for having more than 50% stamina. Or, to make things risky, you could offer a ramping buff based on the percent of stamina missing, maxing out at 80%, which would promote play at those low stamina thresholds. Echo usage. Echoes were marked as a vital part of this game, both for combat and for traversal. Nothing saddens me more than the apparent phasing out of echo usage in both of these areas, with more focus on characters. So much so that we even have characters with echo damage type abilities for flavor, rather than primarily using echoes or increasing echo usage themselves. I believe there are 3 major reasons that echoes in combat may not currently be well received. 1. They don't feel rewarding when they are used. 2. 4-cost echoes require being the active echo skill to receive their buffs, limiting usage of other echo skills. And 3. Many echoes do not seamlessly incorporate well into characters' combat kits. A particular example of this is Nightmare Crownless for Camellia, where using the echo puts you in the air, which can be a bit awkward of a place for Camellia to be. Not to mention, you can't consistently attack out of the animation, instead forcing a dodge cancel that may not flow naturally for most players. That being said, a general support for echo skill usage teams could lower echo skill cooldowns, or increase their damage, opening the floor for more echo skill usage. Alternatively, this support could cast their liberation to, quote, extend terminal capacity, end quote, providing a tool to all party members that provides them access to their second slot echo. This second option, personally, would be particularly appealing. Overclocking. This general support would revolve around the latter half of Overlord or Calamity fights when the boss begins to overclock. That, or it could force enemies to overclock even at full health, making for more risky gameplay, but that would obviously come with some payoff, such as cooldown reductions, attack speed bonuses, or damage boosts, or some other utility, like mobility. Speaking of mobility, this mechanic is in desperate need to even the playing field for many of the older cast. Characters, such as Jian, suffer greatly when enemies start running all over the place, which they do a lot now. If there's no general support that can root enemies, then the best option would be to add general supports that provide their team mobility options. For instance, in Mobility Sans Liberation or Outro, it could replace all team members' mid-air heavy attack with an extremely quick gap closer when the boss is outside of a small radius of the character. When within said radius though, teammates receive some damage-oriented buff instead. Alternatively, we could tie in the dodge mechanic. Instead of replacing mid-air heavies, this general support could replace dodges with instant teleports, teleporting the active character directly next to the enemy most recently hit. Like Shorekeeper and Lupa's dodge recovery, this dodge would be triggered only if the dodge is not a perfect dodge, and also only when at a minimum distance away from the enemy so as not to affect players' dodge canceling near an enemy. Combo. This type of general support would provide payoffs for continually attacking, be that skill, liberation, any type of damage dealt. racking up a combo meter that provides ramping buffs based on said meter. Alternatively, it could provide buffs to make comboing easier, for instance interruption resistance, which would be particularly useful against enemies like Cartethia. All of her attacks seem to stagger me. Or, if we want to be risky again, the stacking combo meter could lower interruption resistance. In this case, perfect dodges would need to count towards the meter, otherwise this would just be an impossible playstyle. Tools. Roshia, although I don't have her, was the inspiration for this one. Why only have one character that provides tools in combat? A general tool support could 1. Provide payoffs for using tools, such as Roshia's tool, or the grapple, or other tools. Or 2. Provide tools, such as a mobility tool that teleports you to the targeted enemy. Ideally, this character would also buff utility damage as well, or make Roshia's tool, which for some reason counts as an echo skill but deals utility damage, just deal echo damage instead. Consistency, please. Concerto. On the launch of Wuthering Waves, Concerto, along with the ecosystem and Forte circuits, were major highlighted mechanics. So what happened? A popularized high-level playstyle, Quickswap, pretty much ignores Concerto. What's worse, with fewer characters coming out whose outro is a decent nuke, the last being Carlotta, those missing outro buffs lost on swap hurt Quickswap teams even more. Honestly, it feels somewhat intentional, moving character designs more towards these hybrid DPS and supports to eliminate such playstyles. Instead of eliminating it, what if there was a general support that allowed buffs to last their full duration and not be lost on swap? This support would not need to provide other payoffs like crit damage or crit rate, because keeping an outro buff is already a huge boon. Alternatively, and for Concerto nuking DPS quickswap teams, would be to make a variation like general support that buffs Concerto generation for each attack, or that provides 25 to 50 Concerto when a character performs their intro skill. Forte Circuit. Now this is very much a personal want. My favorite character was Jinxie, and my second favorite, who is now my favorite, is Zani. However, these characters are reliant on other characters to fill their forte, making it near impossible to play alone. Therefore, I would like a general support that supports Forte generation rate and Forte circuit scaling efficiency. This is a major mechanic that has not yet seen any support, pun intended, since launch. I'll provide a specific example near the end of this video, so stick around to see what I say. Protection Zone. Honestly, I'm not quite sure how to use this mechanic as a general support, but Zani's companion quest when progressing through the Wind Tunnel, and Frolova's 2.5 main story quest when fighting Fenrico inspired this mechanic as a potential point to design around. Perhaps this general support could drop a long-lasting bubble that makes you immune to damage and interruption while inside, but also unable to deal damage. Of course, there would need to be some payoff for hiding like a coward, perhaps some ramping buff that then drops off the longer you're out. Again, I'm unsure about this, as it might be difficult or unwieldy to play around, but I wanted to bring it up to drive home the point that there are many unique mechanics in this game to design new general supports around. It's unfortunate these mechanics haven't been explored before the most recent hybrid DPS and hybrid support buff triggers that we've seen. If you have any questions regarding the other mechanics I mentioned above and how they could be used in general support design, please feel free to drop a comment below. Let's have a discussion. I also want to say that to make these buffs feel unique, they should offer buffs not already obtainable on echoes. For instance, giving 10% energy regeneration doesn't feel great when the same is already available on echoes, limiting their pull potential. Shorekeeper's crit rate and crit damage are exceptions to this though, because damage scales the best with these stats. And unfortunately, there is just not a reliable way to approach maximum crit rate without using supports or character sequences. However, if there was a reasonably time-intensive yet methodical path to build echoes up to perfect pieces, then that would open up space for character design, because 52.5% crit rate would come from 5 max crit rolls. Additionally, buffs that are already in echo stats don't open up any additional playstyles, which is a key point of general supports. I would also like to voice a point of caution. The purpose of a general support is not to break the game mechanics, but to make them more efficient or offer incentives for focusing on certain mechanics and experimenting with different playstyles. For instance, a mechanic that would break the game would be one that bypasses current mechanics, such as vibration strength damage reduction, or ignoring all enemy resistances. Or alternatively, introducing an entirely new mechanic that makes all damage types of a team considered as only X damage type. which would completely invalidate the separation of damage types. Although, let's be honest, main DPS characters have already sadly been doing this pretty much, such as with Augusta's non-enhanced liberation dealing heavy attack damage for whatever unreasonable reason. As we can see from Pridewind calculations, put her damage profile at roughly about 75% heavy attack damage. Personally, I feel a wider array of mechanics should be explored before more hybrid supports such as Lupa comes out, who only support one specific attribute. In the same sense, a character that only supports one damage type, like Yuno with heavy attack, should also not be prioritized until we have a wider cast of characters that can work modestly with each other. Not best in slot, mind you, but functional enough to be able to utilize full kits so that players have choice in who to play with, and so hyper-specific teams like Zani Phoebe don't become stale from overuse, mixing it up sometimes with different enablers. Before closing out, I wanted to give an example of a general support character that I personally want added. This character is meant to work well with Jinxie, as Jinxie, 1, has been falling off a bit, and 2, is rather restricted by needing coordinated attacking characters that are off element to charge her forte gauge. The core design of this character would be a Havoc healing, coordinated attack, traction, forte efficiency support with a Necrostar theme, codename Core Keeper. The Liberation spawns coordinated black holes whenever the active character hits an enemy with a skill, or deals skill damage, triggering every 2 to 3 seconds with the black holes lasting 2 seconds, pulling all units to its center and damaging them several times. The buff duration would be roughly 15 seconds. Since this is a healer's kit, these black holes would obviously heal the active character. If the Forte circuit is full, the coordinated attacks from Resonance Liberation would heal for an additional % of the total damage the black holes deal. Thematically, like a lifesteal mechanic, that scales healing with crits. And finally, most importantly in her kit, not for theme but actual function, is that the outro would buff the team's Forte efficiency, that being plus 50% Forte charge rate rounded down, and plus 20% to scaling. Scaling meaning 20% times level 10 values minus level 1 values, not just a flat 20%. No crit buffs, no damage % bonuses. Finally, all of these thoughts can be extrapolated onto weapons as well. The weapon design space has been extremely limited to just crit rate and crit damage pieces. Therefore, I would also suggest using the above summary of mechanics to make new 4-star and ideally even new standard 5-star weapon series that utilize these mechanics and add more utility to characters' kits, or allow characters to play in a variety of different ways. Added much needed spice to an otherwise extremely predictable and stagnant meta. To be fair, reviewing the 4-star weapons, there are many that take advantage of a few of the mechanics mentioned above. However, the payoffs are very limited and damage focused, increasing just crit rate, crit damage, attack, these types of things, with only 2 offering usable utility, specifically Charging Concerto. More utility-based weapons would open up many gameplay possibilities. Now, as I would like to do with most of my videos, I want to close this out by capturing the general essence of this critique and generalize it to overall game design. This stale meta, where the obvious choice is just to buy the 2 new units and their weapons and run them as a team, has killed any hype I have for upcoming characters. I don't even care if I see leaks anymore, because I already know these new characters will work perfectly with each other and not so particularly well with any previous cast members. Extrapolating beyond Wuthering Waves, this predictability and rigidity is something games in general should avoid. It is important to give players room for team building diversity, especially in a team building game, as that is part of the challenge and appeal. It keeps the game exciting and fresh, lest it grow boring and stale. But that wraps it up for today. Drop a like or a subscribe if you want to be notified of future commentary and discussion like this. Hopefully I'll see you in the next video, but until then, as always, keep those cores fed and stable.